Sheogorath, the Mad God. If you haven't read any of the books about him, or if your only interactions are the Skyrim questline, then you may not know how twisted and vile this man can truly be. There's no greater joy than to manipulate, twist, and deceive, to make people go insane, whether it is through inaction or intense, horrible actions. Hello and welcome back to Bayside Stories. We are reading the 3 books in the 16 Accords of Madness series. These books can only be found in a few locations, but there are hundreds of these books just lying around. You can go and buy them from the Arcanium, or just look around pretty much anywhere in Apocrypha, and you'll probably find one. While you listen or read along with me, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the characters. Think about how truly abhorrent this is, and how twisted of a mind you must have to do these things to people. And to this man, to this god, it's all just a fun game, a harmless prank. Enjoy. 16 Accords of Madness, Volume 6. Ever proud and boastful, Oblivion's mad prince stood 1/5 day of mid-year among the frigid peaks of Skyrim, and beckoned forth Hircine for parley. The huntsman god materialized, for this was his day, and the boldness of Sheogorath intrigued him. Wry without equal, Sheogorath holds in his realm giggling loons, flamboyant auteurs, and craven mutilators. The mad prince will ply profitless bargains, and promote senseless bloodshed for nothing more than the joy of another's confusion, tragedy, or rage. So it was that Sheogorath had set a stage on which to play himself as rival to Hircine. Without haste, the coy prince proffered his contest. Each prince was to groom a beast to meet at this place again 3 years to the hour, and do fatal battle. Expressionless behind his fearsome countenance, Hircine agreed, and with naught but a dusting of snow in the drift, the princes were gone to their realms. Confident, but knowing Sheogorath for a trickster, Hircine secretly bred an abomination in his hidden realm. An ancient deadroth he summoned, and imbued it with the foul curse of lycanthropy. Of pitch, heart, and jagged fang, the unspeakable horror had no peer, even among the great hunters of Hircine's sphere. In the 3rd year, on the given day, Hircine returned where Sheogorath leaned cross-legged on a stone, whistling with idle patience. The prince of the hunt struck his spear into the ground, bringing forth his unnatural, snarling behemoth. Doffing his cap, sly as ever, Sheogorath stood and stepped aside to reveal a tiny, colorful bird perched atop the stone. Demurely it chirped in the bristling gust, scarcely audible. In a twisted, springing heap, the deadroth was upon the stone, leaving only rubble where the boulder had been. Thinking itself victorious, the monster's bloody maw curled into a mock grin, when a subtle song drifted into the crisp air. The tiny bird lightly hopped along the snout of the furious Daedroth. Sheogorath looked on, quietly mirthful, as the diminutive creature picked at the detritus cotton scales betwixt the fiery eyes of the large beast. With howling fury, the were-thing blinded itself trying to pluck away the nuisance, and as it continued for hours, Hircine looked on in shame, while his finest beast gradually destroyed itself in pursuit of the seemingly oblivious bird, all the while chirping a mournful tune to the lonesome rage. Livid but beaten, Hircine burned the ragged corpse and withdrew to his realm, swearing in forgotten tongues. His curse still hangs in those peaks, and no wayfarer tarries for fear of his wrathful aspect in the obscure heights. Turning on his heel, Sheogorath beckoned to the minuscule songbird to perch atop his shoulder, and strolled down the mountains, making for the warm breeze and vibrant sunset of the Abyssian coast, whistling in tune with the tiniest champion in Tamriel. Real quick, before we read this next book, I would like to make a few clarifications. This is the tale of Vaermina, but in Skyrim, she's often referred to as Vaermina. But back in Morrowind, when she was first introduced to the lore, her name was spelled Vaermina, so the M and the N were swapped. But in Skyrim, it's usually seen more as the M-I-N-A rather than N-I-M-A. So if that changes and interchanges, I will probably say one or the other. It does not matter. It's more like a kind of like a dialect, like a cultural thing. It's similar to how the Queen's English and Simplified English have 2 different spellings for the same word. They pronounce relatively the same. Sometimes there's a slight difference, like with color and color. Sometimes that U is often pronounced because of their accents, even though it's just the same word, just slightly different origins. So that's why. Hope you enjoy. 16 Accords of Madness. Vaermina's Tale. Darius Shano found himself running as fast as he could. He had no idea what he was running from or towards, but he didn't care. The desire saturated his mind. There was nothing in the world except flight. He looked around for landmarks, anything to place himself or to use as a target, but to no avail. The featureless grasslands through which he was sprinting extended as far as the eye could see. Just have to keep running, he thought to himself. I have to run as fast as I can. On and on he ran, with no end in sight or in mind. Standing over Darius Shano while he lay quietly in his bed were his mistress, Vaermina the Dreamweaver, and the mad god Sheogorath. Vaermina looked down with pride at this disciple of hers and was boastful of her little jewel. Such potential in this one. Through dreams of inspiration, I have nurtured literary talent into fruition, and now he stands in acclaim as an emerging bard and poet. He will gain much favor before I tire of him. Sheogorath too gazed at the young Breton artist and saw that he was indeed famous among the other mortals. Mused Sheogorath. But how many are there who hate this mortal whom you have built? It is the hatred of the mortals which confirms greatness, and not their love. Surely you can accomplish this as well. Vaermina's eyes narrowed. Yes, the mortals are indeed often foolish and petty, and it is true that many of their most bold have been despised. Do not worry, mad one, for I have the power to achieve many forms of greatness with this one, hatred among them. Perhaps, Dreamweaver, it would be amusing to show who has this power. Inspire foolishness, arrogant hatred of this mortal for 10 years, and then I will do the same. We shall see whose talents are most efficient, free of aid and interference from any of the Daedra. At this, she relaxed into a confident pleasure. The mad god is indeed powerful, but this task is suited to my skills. The mortals are repulsed by madness, but rarely think it worthy of hate. I shall take pleasure in revealing this to you, as I bring the more subtle horrors out of this mortal's subconscious. And so, in the 19th year of his life, the dreams Darius Shano had been experiencing began to change. Fear had always been part of the night for him, but now there was something else. A darkness began to creep into his slumber, a darkness that sucked away all feeling and color, leaving only emptiness behind. When this happened, he opened his mouth to scream, but found the darkness had taken his voice as well. All he had was the terror and the void, and each night they filled him with a new understanding of death. Yet, when he woke, there was no fear, for he had faith that his lady had a purpose. Indeed, one night Vaermina herself emerged from the void. She leaned in close to whisper into his ear, "Watch carefully, my beloved." With that, she pulled the void away, and for hours each night she would reveal to Darius the most horrible perversions of nature. Men being skinned and eaten alive by other men, unimaginable beasts of many limbs and mouths, entire populations being burned. Their screams filled his every evening. In time, these visions gnawed at his soul, and his work began to take on the character of his nightmares. The images revealed to him at night were reproduced on the page, and the terrible cruelty and hollow vice that his work contained both revolted and fascinated the public. They reveled in the disgust of every detail. There were those who openly enjoyed his shocking material, and his popularity among some only fed the hatred of those who found him abhorrent. This continued for several years, while the infamy of Darius grew steadily. Then, in his 29th year, without warning, the dreams and nightmares ceased. Darius felt a weight lifted, as he no longer endured the nightly tortures, but was confused. What have I done to displease my mistress? He wondered aloud. Why has she abandoned me? Vaermina never answers his prayers. No one ever answered, and his restless dreams faded away to leave Darius in a long, deep sleep. Interest in the work of Darius Shano waned. His prose became stale, and his ideas failed to provoke the shock and outrage they once had. As the memory of his notoriety and of his terrible dreams faded, the questions that raced in his mind eventually produced resentment against Vaermina, his former mistress. Resentment grew into hatred. From hatred came ridicule, and over time, ridicule became disbelief. Slowly, it became obvious Vaermina had never spoken to him at all. His dreams were simply the product of a sick mind that had righted itself. He had been deceived by his own subconscious, and the anger and shame overwhelmed him. The man who once conversed with a deity drifted steadily into heresy. In time, all of the bitterness, doubt, and sacrilege focused in Darius a creative philosophy that was threaded through all of his subsequent work. He challenged the gods themselves, as well as the infidel public and corrupt state for worshipping them. He mocked them all with perverse caricature, sparing no one and giving no quarter. He challenged the gods in public to strike him down if they existed, and ridiculed them when no such comeuppance was delivered. To all of this, people reacted with outrage far greater than they had shown his previous work. His early career had offended only sensibility, but now he was striking directly at the heart of the people. His body of work grew in size and intensity. Temples, nobles, and commoners were all targets of his scorn. Finally, at age 39, Darius wrote a piece entitled "The Noblest Fool," ridiculing the emperor god Tiber Septim for integrating into the pathetic Nine Divines cult. The local king of Denia, who had been humiliated by this upstart in the past, saw his chance. For his sacrilege against the empire, Darius Shano was executed with a crimson blade in front of a cheering crowd of hundreds. His last bitter words were gurgled through a mouthful of his own blood. 20 years after their wager was first placed, Vaermina and Sheogorath met over Darius Shano's headless corpse. The Dreamweaver had been eager for this meeting. She had been waiting for years to confront the Daedric Prince over his lack of action. "I have been deceived by you, Sheogorath. I performed my half of the bargain. But during your 10 years, you never contacted the mortal once. He owes none of his greatness to you, or your talents, or your influence." "Nonsense," croaked the mad god. "I was with him all along. When your time ended and mine began, your whispers in his ears were replaced with silence. I severed his link to that from which he found the most comfort and meaning, and withheld the very attention the creature so desperately craved. Without his mistress, the man's character could ripen under resentment and hatred. Now his bitterness is total and overcome by a madness fueled by his rage. He feeds me in my realm as an eternal servant." Sheogorath turned and spoke to the empty space by his side. Indeed, Darius Shana was a glorious mortal, despised by his own people, his kings, and even by the gods he mocked. "For my success, I shall accept 80 followers of Vaermina into my service, and the dreamers will awaken as madmen." And thus did Sheogorath teach Vaermina that without madness there are no dreams and no creation. Vaermina will never forget this lesson. 16 Accords of Madness, Volume 12. Malacath's Tale. In the days before the Orsinium's founding, the spurred orc folk were subject to ostracism and persecution even more numerous and harsh than their progeny are accustomed to in our own age. So it was that many champions of the Orsimer traveled, enforcing what borders they could for their proliferation of their own people. Many of these champions are spoken of yet today, among them the Cursed Legion, Roma the Hairless, and the noble Emig Grokera. This latter crusader would have certainly risen to the legendary status throughout Tamriel, had he not been subject to the attention of certain Daedric princes. Emig Grokera was the bastard son of a young maiden who was killed in childbirth. He was raised by the shaman of his tribe, the Grillicamog, in the peaks of what we now call Normoor Heights. Late in his 15th year, Emig forged by hand an ornate suit of scale armor, a rite of ascension among his tribe. On a blustery day, he pounded the final rivet and draped a heavy cloak over the bulky mantle. Emig set out from his village for the last time. Word of his exploits always returned home, whether defending merchant caravans from brigand or liberating enslaved beast folk. News of the noble orc crusader began to grace even the lips of the Bretons, often with a tinge of fear. Less than 2 years after ascending to maturity, Grokera was making camp when a thin voice called out from the thickening night. He was surprised to hear the language of his people, spoken by a tongue that obviously did not belong to an orc. "Lord Kera," said the voice, "tales of your deeds have crossed the lips of many, and have reached my ears." Peering into the dark murk, Emig made out the silhouette of a cloaked figure, made wavy and ephemeral by the hazy campfire. From the voice alone he had thought the interloper an old hag, but he now decided that he was in the presence of a man of slight and lanky build, though he could discern no further details. "Perhaps," the wary orc began, "but I seek no glory. Who are you?" Ignoring the question, the stranger continued, "Despite that, Orsmer, glory finds you, and I bear a gift worthy of it." The visitor's cloak parted slightly, revealing nothing but faintly glowing buttons in the pale moonlight. and a bundle was withdrawn and tossed to the side of the fire between the two. Imag cautiously removed the rags in which the object was swathed, and was dazzled to discover the item to be a wide, curved blade with ornately decorated handle. The weapon had heft, and Imag realized, on brandishing it, that the elaborate pommel disguised the more practical purpose of balancing the considerable weight of the blade itself. It was nothing much to look at in its present condition, thought the orc, but once the tarnish was cleaned away and a few missing gems restored, it would indeed be a blade worthy of a champion 10 times his own worth. "Her name is Neb Crescen," spoke the thin stranger, seeing the appreciation lighting Grokera's face. "I got her for a horse and a secret in warmer climes, but in my old age I'd be lucky to even lift such a weapon. It's only proper that I pass her on to one such as yourself. To possess her is to change your life, forever." Overcoming his initial infatuation with the arc of honed steel, Imag turned his attention back to the visitor. "Your words are fine, old man," Imag said, not masking his suspicion. "But I'm no fool. You traded for this blade once, and you'll trade for it again tonight. What is it that you want?" The stranger's shoulders slumped, and Imag was glad to have unveiled the true purpose of this twilight visit. He sat with him a while, eventually offering a sack of furs, warm food, and a handful of coins in exchange for the exotic weapon. By morning, the stranger was gone. In the week following Imag's encounter with the stranger, Neb Crescen had not left its scabbard. He had encountered no enemies in the woods, and his meals consisted of fowl and small game caught with bow and arrow. The peace suited him fine, but on the 7th morning, while fog still crept between the low-hanging boughs, Imag's ears perked up at the telltale crunch of nearby footfall in the dense snow and forest debris. Imag's nostrils flared, but he was upwind, being unable to see or smell his guest, and knowing that the breeze carried his scent in that direction. Imag's guard was up, and he cautiously drew Neb Crescen from its sheath. Imag himself was not entirely sure of all that happened next. The first moment of conscious memory in Imag Grokera's mind after drawing Neb Crescen was the image of a curved blade sweeping through the air in front of him, splattering blood all over the virginal powder coating the forest floor. The second memory was a feeling of frenzied bloodlust creeping over him. But it was then that he saw for the first time his victim, an orc woman, perhaps a few years younger than himself. Her body a canvas of grisly wounds, enough to kill a strong man 10 times over. Imag's disgust overwhelmed the madness that had taken over him, and with all his will enlisted, he released Neb Crescen from his grip and let the blade sail. With a discordant ringing, it spun through the air and was buried in a snowdrift. Imag fled the scene in shame and horror, drawing the hood of his cloak up to hide himself from the judging eyes of the rising sun. The scene where Imag Grokera had murdered one of his own kind was a macabre one. Below the neck, the body was flayed and mutilated, almost beyond recognition, but the untouched face was frozen in permanent expression of abject terror. It was here that Sheogorath performed certain rites that summoned Malacath, and the 2 Daedric lords held court in the presence of the disfigured corpse. "Why show me this, mad one?" began Malacath, once he recovered from his initial wordless anger. "Do you take such pleasure in watching me grieve the murder of my children?" His guttural voice rumbled, and the patron of the Orsmer looked upon his counterpart with accusing eyes. "By birth she was yours, brother outcast," began Sheogorath, solemn in aspect and demeanor. "But she was a daughter of mine by her own habits. My mourning here is no less than your own, my outrage no less great." "I'm not sure," grumbled Malacath, "but rest assured that vengeance for this crime is mine to reap. I expect no contest from you. Stand aside." As the fearsome prince began to push past him, Lord Sheogorath spoke again. "I have no interest in standing between you and vengeance. In fact, I mean to help you. I have servants in the wilderness, and can tell you just where to find our mutual foe. I ask only that you use a weapon of my choosing, wound the criminal with my blade, and banish him to my plane, where I can exact my own punishment. The right of honor killing here belongs to you." With that, Malacath agreed, and took the wide blade from Sheogorath, and was gone. Malacath materialized in the path of the murderer, the cloaked figure obscured through a blizzard haze, bellowing a curse so foul as to wilt the surrounding trees. The blade was drawn, and Malacath closed the distance more quickly than a wild fox. Frothing with rage, he swung the blade in a smooth arc, which lopped the head of his foe cleanly off, then plunged the blade up to the hilt in his chest, choking off the spurts of blood into a steady, growing stain of red bubbling from beneath the scale mail and heavy cloak. Panting from the unexpected immediacy and fury of his own kill, Malacath rested on a knee as the body before him collapsed heavily backwards, and the head landed roughly upon a broad, flat stone. The next sound broke the silence like a bolt. I'm sorry, sputtered the voice of Imag Grokera. Malacath's eyes went wide as he looked upon the severed head, seeping blood from its wound, but somehow kept alive. Its eyes wavered about wildly, trying to focus on the aspect of Malacath before it. The once proud eyes of the champion were choked with tears of grief, pain, and confused recognition. To his horror, Malacath realized only now that the man he had killed was not only one of his Orsimer children, but very literally a son he had blessed an orc maiden with years hence. For achingly long moments, the two looked upon each other, despondent and shocked. Then, silent as oiled steel, Sheogorath strolled into the clearing. He hefted Imag Grokera's disembodied head and bundled it into a small, grey sack. Sheogorath reclaimed Neb Krishen from the corpse and turned to walk away. Malacath began to stand, but kneeled again, knowing he had irreversibly damned his own offspring to the realm of Sheogorath, and mourned his failure as the sound of his son's hoarse pleas faded into the frozen horizon.